Awesome. Great. Hello and welcome all to Hollywood SMPTE's Lunch and Learn event. SMPTE Hollywood and IMF user group welcome you to IMF best practices. Thrilled to have you all here. Just a couple of notes. There is, I think, one more day for the 15% off membership to SMPTE. So I hope that you will take advantage of that. I know I will. And also, that's a great membership discount. Also, I know the caliber of attendees and panelists we have here. So please, any questions, put them on the Q&A. I believe that the panelists and Barry will look at them and answer them as they come up, maybe in writing, unless they feel they want to voice them, that's up to them. And without further ado, I want to introduce you to our producer and moderator, Barry Goch, and I want to thank all the panelists and all of the attendees for being here today. I'm Linda Rossner, SMPTE Hollywood Chair. Over to you, Barry.
Thanks so much, Linda. Welcome to the SMPTE Hollywood HPA IMF User Group webinar entitled IMF Explained. In the next hour, you will learn about how IMFs are rapidly becoming the de facto standard for content delivery to the studios and streamers alike. In fact, just 2 days ago, in Resolve 17.4.6, Sony added a new IMF preset for Sony deliveries. Please take a moment to review the speaker's bios online, since I will keep the panelists' introduction short to focus on this big topic. Also, please post your questions in the Q&A during the webinar and to which panelist you would prefer to answer the question, just so we can keep the webinar moving along. There's a lot to get through. We'll have a brief question and answer session at the end as well. Finally, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the SMPTE Hollywood YouTube channel in a few days. Without further ado, let's get the webinar started with Mike Krause representing the IMF user group. Mike, take it away.
Great, thanks, Barry. And thanks, Linda, and all of our panelists here today for the chance to get together. And hello to all of our attendees from beautiful downtown Burbank. So I'm going to switch over to my presentation. 1 second here. Let's jump right in. I promise I'll be fast so everybody has a chance to ask questions and we can get through all of our panelists. So let's take a look at a brief history of IMF. And fair warning, this will have a little bit of a Disney bent to it, perhaps unsurprisingly, but I'll do my best to be as neutral as I can. Okay, so let's jump in. So IMF, the year was 2010. It was a dark time. Tape workflows were increasingly incompatible. Versionitis was rampant. .4K, UHD, and HDR loomed on the horizon. The industry needed a hero. And in 2013, our hero was born. IMF was published. So from the Disney point of view, we needed a better way to organize the multitude of localized programs for which Disney is famous. Walt realized early on that translating our characters and storylines better enabled audiences to relate to and enjoy them. But as the number of programs grew, so did the complexity of localization. After decades of linear work on film and videotape, it was obvious we needed a better way. With the industry moving toward file-based workflows, an opportunity really presented itself. Within Disney, a number of us had been putting our heads together when somebody mentioned, well, you need something like DCP, but for downstream mastering. It was really a light bulb moment for us as a studio. We immediately began a training montage, of course. We gathered with like-minded industry folks and we got to work. When we presented the concepts to our colleagues across the industry and the standards body SMPTE, it basically took on a life of its own. So, of course, Disney's not alone here. All the major studios, facilities, all of our partners across the industry were experiencing similar challenges, just from a different angle. Along those lines, David and Greg are going to give us a glimpse into Sony's point of view in a few minutes. Probably the biggest things we realized early on as part of this effort was that we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. Yet recycling old formats for tasks which they were never really intended was not going to cut it with what we wanted to do. We also knew we needed better interoperability as well as extensibility for the future. Because this was no small endeavor, we brought in many technology partners. This slide certainly is not exhaustive, but there's a few common folks on here I think you'll all know. Before we started to standardize though, we performed early experiments with the Entertainment Technology Center to help prove our concepts. In short, we wanted to make sure we weren't crazy, or at least not crazier than usual. We knew that standardization was going to be slow also. So we decided we would lean on proven standards whenever we possibly could. At the same time, SMPTE itself was working to improve the speed of the standardization process, which we know, again, it can drag. There's a lot of work that goes into that, but SMPTE was dedicated to moving into that future as well along with us. So that was awesome because that helped us move really quickly here. So back to a little bit of the Disney point of view and kind of why we went into IMF and pushed the technology as quickly as we could. So as I mentioned, we make numerous versions of programs for worldwide distribution. As we moved into file-based workflows, we created this system internally where we would only store the pieces needed for variants rather than full-length multiple versions of everything on tape, on film, on whatever, ProRes files, whatever formats you could think of. We called our strategy basically the pre-IMF strategy because it was the whole concept of how IMF is meant to work. We jumped in right away. So it wasn't easy. Long established workflows don't change overnight. It literally took a cyclone in Southeast Asia, which destroyed big tape factories and caused worldwide shortages to move us forward as an industry. So file-based workflows at the time were still kind of new and kind of expensive, and for most folks was a little bit scary. We had experience with digital intermediates and digital cinema, but with the networking limitations of the time, moving around, we sort of laugh about it now, but moving around a couple of terabytes of data was at the time pretty difficult, frankly. Our componentized strategy proved itself right away. So we only had to store and move a fraction of the media to make language versions of a program. As we started working with IMF, the additional savings with lossless compression proved itself. When we started looking for a potential replacement for some of the proprietary formats in some distributions, the file savings themselves became more apparent. It was also pretty remarkable learning that we could master using IMF lossy and lossless in the same data footprint as a single uncompressed master. As we moved into the world of UHD and HDR, the workflows that we projected immediately proved themselves. Again, this is something that David and Greg are really going to dive into. So remember, UHD and 4K is not just twice the size of HD, it's 4 times the size. So this is a tangible motivator for how we got started with IMF. J2K just really takes advantage in compression and makes our lives so much easier. Okay, so let's talk quickly about localization on a grand scale and avoiding versionitis with IMF. So we usually start with the domestic master at a textless element, which is used with localized inserts and by marketing. We also make what we call a semi-textless element, which handles a lot of distributions with subtitles. The IMF composition playlist coordinates all of these pieces, and there's no guesswork. It just works every single time. There is no mix and match of give me a ProRes file, give me EDLs, give me this, give me that, and put it into some custom system. We make an IMF and we're kind of done. So remember, we're only including the pieces needed to build a given version. So when building it, we often call this a supplemental package, meaning it leverages media from another package to make the full-length version on playback. So in Disney's ecosystem, multiply the number of supplemental builds by the various formats we have to create, and again, by the number of language versions we make. If we aren't careful through planning and mastering, this is where versionitis happens. Shawn and Bruno are going to talk about how their tool sets help us keep all of this organized and avoid versionitis. A few of you on the call may remember I spoke at HPA a number of years ago, and one of the things that I learned early in that part of the process was that at Disney, depending on the film, we would make upwards of 35,000 versions of the same title. That number blew me away. It still does to this day. Between all the different formats and compressions and languages and frame rates and dynamic ranges and everything in between, it was incredible to me learning, what we were really doing behind the scenes in mastering. And IMF actually helps us reduce that number of elements dramatically, as well as keep us organized. So today in IMF, we're doing most of our common mastering workflows. It's really become the mainstay. I list a couple of here to simplify it for the slide, but across the industry, we're already including cutting edge capability, like things like Dolby Vision, which we're standardizing using ISXD. We're including Atmos surround audio, which we're using through standardization through IAB track files. And we're also standardizing kind of the next generation of what we expect IMF to look like. We've had almost 10 years of experience working with this now. And we want to include, not just as a recommendation, but actual standardization using the Academy color encoding system and increasing our efficiency through encode and decode with things like high throughput J2K. Again, this list is not exhaustive. There's a lot of things that we are looking at to build on for the future with IMF. And it's a really exciting time to see where we've come from this nascent format that was sort of an upstart in the industry to now it's the mainstay, and most of us are doing it, and very successfully. So thanks everybody for your time, and back to you, Barry.
Well, thanks so much, Mike. That was a really great intro to the topic, and we're going to switch over to Shawn from Blackmagic now. He's going to take over the presentation. And one thing that came to mind listening to Mike was that, what are some of the things that people need to look out for when they're preparing the IMF master? And maybe you can talk about that specifically inside of of Resolve and inside of Colorfront, because as people are coming to this new format, there's probably a lot of questions like, how do I get the media? How do I get my project in ship shape, so to speak? So Shawn, please go ahead and take it away.
All right, thank you. And thank you, Barry and Linda, for inviting me to this. I will focus my time on, well, I'm going to lean heavily on the UI here of Resolve so I can show you all of these features all at the same time. So let me go ahead and launch my screen. And there we are. Yeah, okay, so briefly, let me just pop back into the edit page really quickly before we get there. Just wanted to point out that since I'm talking about some of these, advanced workflows and deliverable packages, this is also another advanced workflow that I'm sort of demonstrating at the moment. And well, here you can see that I'm running on a system that's actually not my host system. So just FYI, I'm doing this on a little a virtual machine. So this is Resolve running in this virtual environment. I've got some of our test footage here from the Disunity documentary. I think this is involved in our official training for the color page. This timeline here, just we've made a few edits. That has a few audio tracks. This is going to be very simple as far as a demonstration here with the 2.0 audio. But just to show you how this starts as clips, we move it through the workflow, right? We've got our color page where a lot of you are familiar. But then when we get down to the format that we want to choose for our output, and we're talking IMF all day long, I wanted to point out something that just came out. Barry, you dropped this hint. 17.4.6, DaVinci Resolve Studio 17.4.6 has been released. And in that new package is this preset for Sony to join the additional options for generic, Disney, and Netflix. And so as I've already exported a few of these things, I just wanted to show essentially. This is my timeline. And let's pop into some of the options for what we choose. If I'm following along with everyone here, I'm in the deliver page, and it's time to look at my custom render settings. So up here in the IMF section, as I scroll across, you can see the 4 options available. And as I make some determination about the option that I'm looking for, you can see we have some codec options, right? The Kakadu JPEG 2000. Easy DCP is just if you happen to have that license. This is for other workflows as well. And then, of course, we have some presets, right? Preset type here in the Disney preset. Some Netflix options. And you can see I have a very simple project that's just, SDR. And then, of course, the Sony. And as we were talking about this, the IMF format, right? The interoperable master format. This format delivers, video essences and a playlist. And in my export here, you'll see that I have a few options. So I've just decided to pop in here into the video options under the Sony Pictures selection. So in my presets, we can look at our advanced settings. Hopefully these are coming across as they are kind of small and on my left. But you can see that there's a few options here, including something below that called comp settings. And if I bring up the comp settings panel, we have this comp name generator. So the title of this project is Disunity. And then I've just said, great, let's use composition settings. We've picked our audio type, which is false. Obviously, this is stereo. And then a lot of the other aspects that you can, attributes rather that you need to check. Rating, territory, language. Having populated this, we can look back up, well, actually, since I'm here in the composition settings, segment list, single segment or regular intervals, right? Breaking it into reels. And then these are just default for pulling the metadata that I've already assigned in my comp name generator and then using that. In this case, I don't have any subtitle tracks, so there's no need to send subtitles in here. Into the audio tab, I've got just the main stereo track, as I mentioned. So this is very simple. And on the file tab, we have custom name or comp name. So if I just choose comp name, you see the file name is picked for me. The other thing is, I've got a location where I've rendered this. Now I exported this piece here. So if I just look at it in the media storage, what you're looking at is, and let's go ahead and pop into that. All right, come back, File Explorer. Thank you. Something very simple. Created a new directory for this. All right. IMF exports. Okay, so here's what that package looks like, right? You've seen, you saw the render queue item, and you saw that it exported the file, and the file turns out to be this combination of metadata and essence file. So there's your video essence, there's your audio essence, asset map, composition playlist, etc. Pack, all the options that you see that correspond to the deliver page under the video playlist files. These are all picked here and here. So what I've done is I've exported this file, but I think I want to show you how Resolve sees it, right? Because you saw that this is a package content, but let's look at the current version. So Resolve sees this file directly as, an importable file. And you can see up in the top right-hand corner, you can see the metadata about this file. I'm going to show you something else, which is to create a new timeline using this composition playlist, because, Mike talked about the fact that this is versionitis, right? IMF is preventing versionitis. So there it is, versionitis, because I can spell, and let's create that. So what I've done is I've created this playlist of essences from the IMF options. So let's go ahead and switch into that timeline. Here's versionitis, and let's do something simple, like just, right. Okay, instead of that standard gradient, I'm going to replace it with the noise gradient. Let's just go ahead and pop that in here. All right, because we had to create a version that didn't have that standard gradient. So when we get to our video tab now, right, you saw that I had some selections at the beginning. This is the IMF selection. I've already chosen the Sony. So I've made this timeline based on my supplemental playlist. So I'm just gonna, rather based on my original CPL. So I'm gonna say this is a supplemental package. And then, I'm gonna verify all these other settings that they're still correct, especially concerned, as far as best practices, as to Barry's comment, just, verify that your codec, your sample rate, your output tracks are appropriate, because these will start out as defaults. In this case, this is all great. And I'm going to add to the render queue. And let's actually, let's back up and tell it we're going to go to the supplemental area instead. And did I choose? Yes, use current date. Great. Let's edit that. Let's see. Yeah. 030. Great. Update the job. Now you see that in this little thumbnail, right, it didn't really show us the rest of this content because it was only adding that. So let's go ahead and reveal this new file in media storage. In the supplemental package, well, there it is. There's my supplemental package. As I scroll through, or I can import it as a file. As I scroll through, you'll see that, yep, there it is. I've created my masterpiece, my custom version masterpiece with just this noise gradient. So I thought it was important to kind of demonstrate the ability of Resolve to, work with a bunch of different workflows and output to a variety of deliverable formats. And in the case of IMF, we support the options of importing the IMF, which is a package and playlist format with essences, as a single clip, making a new timeline out of that clip so that we can easily manage our supplemental packages, per the notes that Mike brought up about, versionitis. So I've named it versionitis, Mike, in your honor. And I'm happy to yield any other time, so we have time for Q&A. But essentially, this is in the current version of DaVinci Resolve Studio 17.4.6. And
I have a quick question for you, Shawn.
Yeah, Barry.
Since we do have a minute, could you just discuss the subtitle track and how that might work in using IMFs?
I would be looking in the same area actually in the deliver page. I would just tick the box for my export subtitles. So that's chances are you're sending, right? IMF package is sending a separate file, and then you can see here. Hopefully you can see here. I don't think I can make this any larger for people. Perhaps the zoom options for everyone who's zooming away at home or in their office. You can zoom into this region. And those are the options that we support for, exporting subtitles.
Great.
Which are relatively new, actually, because for the longest time we supported the SRT and the Web VTT.
Yeah, I've used the subtitle track recently in a project, and that's how it came to mind. So great. So thanks so much for that, Shawn. We'll keep the webinar moving along for everybody at home and all around the world. So Bruno, you're up. It's your turn.
Great, thanks, Barry. I'm Bruno Munger. I'm a Director of Business Development at Colorfront. I want to show what does someone, I didn't want to do a product demonstration. I want to show what someone would do on a day-to-day basis when you have to make an IMF, QC an IMF, automated and manual verification tools to actually see your IMF. So let me go through a couple of slides. Hopefully it's going to be helpful for you guys. I took the user point of view as opposed to the manufacturer point of view, so you can see what someone would have to do when creating an IMF. So let me share my screen. And all right, so we're Colorfront. Thank you. This is a presentation. This is the presentation is about Transcoder 2022. This is the main UI when you load something in Transcoder. So the first thing you have to do, you have to choose your IMF format. As Shawn was showing, you have to decide which studio is it going to. Is it Hulu, the flavor of Hulu, the flavor of Netflix, Warner Brother? Is it SDR? Is it HDR? So is it CBS? Is it Paramount? All the difference are quite the same. It's all the same standard, but the devil's in the details. We made all of these throughout the years, these flavors of, Sony Studios SDR, Sony Studio HDR. So we want to make sure that there's the least amount of mistakes that is done when you create an IMF. So you can see here, if it's a IMF Netflix HDR with IAB, which is the Dolby Atmos tracks, or if it's not. So we want to make sure that you click a preset and then all the options aligns and make themselves available for you. Then you have to decide your render strategy, right? So sometimes certain workflow will say the video strategy, I want one single IMF, even though my timeline is organized in shots or reel. Sometimes a render video strategy will be per reel. Sometimes it'll be per reel marker. Sometimes it'll be. So we want to make sure that we have these options to give you the render strategy. Then also the audio render strategy. Some studios will have certain differences where, audio will stay in reels, or some other studios will say the audio will be one single file for the 5.1. So we want to have the ability to give, this choice to the user. Although we're following all the studio specs and you don't have to choose that. I just wanted to mention that this is an option for people to overwrite a preset in the application. And then you decide, like, is it going to be main level 7? Is it going to be RGB 444? Is it going to be YCBCR for a delivery master as opposed to an archival master? Or so there's a lot of different things. Not some studios will ask you to do a main level 5 and a main level 7 for the same deliverable. So we work very careful that we name our preset based on the jobs that you're doing for the studio you're trying to hit. So this is the encoder page in Transcoder 2022. Then the color information. We're Colorfront. Color is paramount for us. So is it color 7? Is it Rec 2020? Is it constrained to P3? Is it Rec 709? All of these things, they allow you to look at what you're about to deliver. Plus, if there's some change that you, like the mastering monitor was not an X300, all of this stuff can be changed and looked at before you deliver. So we have like a very deep tool that not only allows you to make your choice about the JPEG 2000, but also all of the color information that's about to get into your delivery. So that's the color page. The next thing is how you're going to name your files, right? So everybody, if you look at the Disney specification, the Netflix specification, they have a specific name for the CPL, specific name for the MXF essence within it. So this allows you to create templates and make sure that you don't make mistakes. Because if the name change, you have to, rehash the CPL. So you want to make sure that all of this is good. The next thing, markers, right? So the IMF, you need to do, where is the content starts? Where's the beginning? All the markers needs to be also done within the. So you see, like first frame of content, second, like where's the bar? If there's color bars, where do they start? All of the IMF markers are very important, and I wanted the audience to understand that markers. Some studios wants to have markers part of the IMF. Subtitles, you need to review subtitles. We have a very advanced subtitle engine that allows you not only to publish and make an IMF, but how do you review subtitles? A lot of studios will say, I want you to QC the Hebrew, the French version, and have all these subtitles included as VF, but also you need to QC them and watch them. How do you inspect an IMF? You need to look at the CPL metadata. So you need to look at it. You also need to look at the MXF metadata part of the IMF. So there's automated QC, but there's also manual QC. Like, is the color metadata within the MXF match what may or may not be in the CPL? All of these things, for anyone that has made an IMF, will tell you it is really great, but there's mistakes. When humans do certain things, there will be mistakes, and you want to make sure that all of this is right. So that's another, CPL. I'm looking at the timelines. Is the resolution in the CPL matches the essence in the MXF? These are all things that happens when you make an IMF. Subtitle QC, I just talked about it. I'm sorry, I kind of went ahead of me. So this is like a way to see every subtitles in your timeline, display them on screen, and make sure that if there's a spelling mistake, you may want to change it, or you want to at least indicate telling the subtitle house that they need to redeliver a new subtitle. Automated validation. How do you automate all of this? We have our own, validation library that checks, is there a CPL? Is there an asset map? Is all of these things proper to you? So we have this really exhaustive, long library inside of Transcoder. We also have support Photon from the open source library that was generously, developed by Netflix. So you can run the IMF validation, the Photon validation directly there. So if somebody says, I'm actually not rejecting your package, well, here's my Photon validation, and you can make sure that it's all okay. Dolby Vision. I know it's not a Dolby seminar, but every studios in HDR have Dolby. and want to do Dolby Vision. So we also include our own library for Dolby Vision validation within Transcoder. And we also use the Dolby professional tools, such as to actually validate, and you don't have to run external command line to make sure that all your L1 and all your metadata in Dolby is actually matching. So we run our validation plus the Dolby tool, and then visual QC. You know, you can't trust machines, but you know, you'll have to have some eyeballs on your IMF. This is an example of things we do. This is a Dolby Vision master. We're actually splitting screen and showing with the integrated Dolby CMU how you can make a 709 trim and a 2020 trims side by side, and watching them while you're listening to audio to make sure that you do have all the colorist metadata and the Dolby Vision metadata within the application. The graph that you see there is a bitrate graph. So you can also watch the bitrate. Was the compression okay? Is everything good? You can run PSNR graph and all sorts of very advanced techniques to make sure that the compression is good. This is another example of the CMU. You want to look at your content at 600 nit in P3 to simulate how it's going to look on a Sony, LG, or other Dolby Vision compatible monitor. You can do all of this within the application. Plus, lastly, but not the least, we also have our own HDR validation tools that will show you L1 and also like Max Falls, Max CLL, to make sure that if it's constrained to P3 in the Rec 2020 container, your color stays within P3. And plus, if it's 1,000 nit deliverables, make sure that it is 1,000 nit on all the shots. So if you have any question, please ask. This was a short presentation of all the things that you can run into making IMF within all these great applications. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Bruno, for that overview. There's quite a lot to this, and I want to keep the webinar moving forward so we have time for lots of Q&A at the end. So let's go ahead and then jump on to our next panelists. Let's welcome David and Greg from Sony Pictures. So David and Greg, go ahead and take it away.
Hey, thanks so much, Barry. And you know, it's kind of interesting. I was listening to Bruno talk and Mike, and I don't know why when we give examples about versions of IMF, we always refer to the French version. I do that as well. I've just noticed that over time. Everybody refers to it, but yeah, it's an odd one. I got to change that one up. But also, you know, the way that this is set up is, you know, a lot of this is, you know, you look at how, you know, Mike had explained a lot of the detail to what we're doing, and then you talk about what Shawn and Bruno brought to the table was a lot about how we're doing it, and I think what we're going to try to bring to the table is a little bit of the why behind it. And try to tackle this from a little bit of a business use case. And so when we go back to, you know, our timeline, I think it was 13, 14, thereabouts. And, you know, we started to think about our processes in a very non-linear fashion. And I think that's the complication when you start talking about IMF, you talk about the versions, you talk about the localization, is that historically in a tape world, those had all very fundamental foundational milestones. I made my tape, I did my laybacks, I created my different versions down the line, and everybody had these processes, and they would essentially order a tape from your master inventory and move that tape to a facility or move that element to some other location. And what we had to kind of get around was, how do we create that exact same, you know, feeling of moving that element that they had before, that all the mastering and servicing teams had before, and make sure that there was a confidence within that supply chain, and then also as we're looking at it is what other workflows that are tied to localization and to additional versioning could you start to stack further upstream to do as much as possible while the hood was up. So with that, I'll drop it over to David real quick to run through some of this.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. And thank you, Bruno and Shawn and Mike for kind of laying some of the foundational work here about kind of how we got there. Because as Mike alluded to, we weren't the only people facing some of these same challenges. I mean, we really kind of came in and we had some issues that we were trying to get around, namely how to get 4K onto some of these new panels that Sony was now putting out. And we had an R&D team on the lot that was looking at this, led by Bill Bagalar, and they were looking at how they could come out with putting 4K into a format that was not tape based. Because I don't know if a decade ago there were people talking about taking 4 HT-Cam SRs, locking them up and doing quad splits on them. So we could imagine what a nightmare that would have been had we not, Bill and his team not forced the issue and making an adoption choice for IMF in our use case there for interchanging and mastering 4K. So that was kind of the genesis on our side to really push the envelope there as to how do we get a good interchange format for 4K to do that. So that's where we started to look at it for encoding some of these fulfillment supply chains and really look at it for that. So these problem statements were very common from what we were hearing. How do we version? How do we get it into 4K? How do we do things? And key thing there, as Greg was talking about, was how do we make it simple and adaptable to not only the people internally, but the people externally. And as far as looking at IMF, there's so many layers to it. It was a brilliant way that the approach of taking physical assets, putting them into virtual tracks, and then making them available in a composition level. So kind of having that stack of assets where you could now have componentry at various levels. But that gets really confusing to people who are used to interchanging tapes, right? So you really confuse people. So at the stroke of genius was on the ordering side of things. We had physical inventory, which was tape and barcodes. Essentially, you put a barcode on a tape and you send it out the door, off it goes, right? That's how people knew about it. That's how people tracked their orders and did things, layback audio, all that fun stuff. Well, we said, well, IMF is this extensible format, but at the same token, you can take a version of it, a composition, and say, well, a composition is a complete set of audio, video, and things like that, very similar to a tape. So why don't we start barcoding those compositions? And we started matching digital inventory at a composition level on the IMF side with our physical inventory right alongside the tapes that we would have in our asset tracking system. That made a lot of sense to people because now they knew how to order barcodes that were physical and digital. And so it made the transition very easy to socialize internally and make it and be able to have people feel like these things are tangible assets. So that kind of took us into, that kind of really left us into that opportunity. That really helped us accelerate these things. We now had a format that we could leverage. We could then use the open standardization of JPEG 2000 inside of IMF to not only try and put the format together, but to also say like, hey, people are used to interchanging HD in a way that's monolithic. It was ProRes of the day, right? Everybody wanted a ProRes file, but it was HD. It was a known quantity. It was a couple hundred gigabytes for a feature-length movie at HD. Well, the challenge part of our R&D and using a format like JPEG 2000 inside of IMF really allowed us to kind of tweak out the secret sauce under the hood and say, well, sure, everybody can look at IMF, the profiles as constant bitrate, but if we looked at them as kind of an opportunity to inject some slope-based coding in there, we can now target a quality level that we feel is acceptable and the outcome could be as lightweight as HD. So we challenged ourselves to make 4K the same size as HD, which worked out wonderfully because we were able to target our parameters with a slope-based encode and be able to hit the same file sizes that people were accustomed to in the HD world. And it wasn't easy. Took a lot of head scratching and a lot of late nights. But at the end of the day, it came together. The partners who were able to encode and wrap and help us with that really helped us move that format into where it needed to be for distribution. And we put it into this medium for 4K mastering and distribution, which has been kind of a really good base for us to kind of go forward into the future with. So that's kind of our story. That's how we applied it. We had all the benefits that Mike Krause outlined there before about how you can version things, how you can just save the deltas on your new version, how you can have all that stuff. So, if you linearized all that stuff out into monolithic large files, you could take 40 versions of a movie. It's not uncommon to have 40 localizations of stuff. So if you were to render those 40 out, and you were sitting on 10, 20 terabytes worth of stuff, that same package that we would do in IMF would be well under 500 gigs. I mean, and it would be in 4K. So we collapse the model of being able to leverage this format and take advantage of the supplemental features and all the things that were planned out at the beginning of IMF and capitalize on it in 4K. And throughout the years, of course, some of the other things that was discussed here about HDR, going into those types of things, IAB, as far as immersive audio, all the other standards that have come along fit within this same container. The standards have been evolving to accommodate all this stuff, and the roadmap is pretty nice on it. And Greg is in Greg's role. His group has been very instrumental in adopting a lot of these best practices, and especially in the opportunity where it presents itself here.
Yeah, and I think as Dave was mentioning, I think what you're really looking at is you're looking at flexibility, right? And I think things that had happened over years is when we were more in the tape world or any of these tape to a digitized world, there was a lot of process change with any adjustment, right? There's a lot of thought that you had to put into it. And it's not that IMF completely eliminates that thought process, but it puts it into a bit of a sandbox that says, hey, we're going to solve this within the IMF construct. And it means that we have a community that's helping us solve those problems. We're not doing it by ourselves. And I think that's the big win here is that, when there are things that come up like, IAB, and there are things that come up like HDR, there's a community that you can contribute to and leverage kind of best of breed thought process and bring that into how we're doing things at the studio. And, what's really neat about it is every one of these milestones just became an addition to what we were already doing with our IMFs. And then it allows for us to go back to things that we've done as early as 2014, 2013, and, bring those into a new container, with the new Dolby Vision X, Y, and Z, or the new HDR look, or the new, Atmos surround, mix. But we're able to then always start from that initial starting point. And I think one of the other things is when you talk about QC, and I think Bruno touched on this, is one of the speeds and efforts and around keeping the differences only is when you go into QC, you can QC that one main track once, and then you're only QCing the differences on your CPLs, which speeds up a lot of time. But what it also does is it gives you more confidence in that delivery, whether that's to a partner or to a partner that's also then delivering to another partner for us.
Exactly, and that's pretty important, especially as we get down to the lines of like how do these things get supplied to us, and how do we get them into the supply chains? Working with people like Bruno and Blackmagic and all the other manufacturers out there, it's really the adoption and the interoperability for us is key, and the partners who have been pushing that and constantly making the adjustments to make this an easy adoption it's just been great. The community support around it, we've really benefited from that, and we've really pushed on the support of it to be able to have everybody come to the table with their ideas and be able to find a common platform for this interchange to work. Because interchanging packaged formats like this is not a real easy thing. There's been bumps along the way, but I think the strength of IMF being a packaged format, as I mentioned, having the different layers in it, rolling up into a composition, sounds simple and sounds great, and the extensibility of it is awesome. But there has definitely been interchange challenges along the way, and the community really comes together to solve those things. So that's really the nice opportunity that we've seen. And just to throw it up here, throwing some words on a page here of a goal of where we want to be. It's really around that standardization and making sure that we have community adoption, and making sure that we are incorporating things like best practices. And we're working with everybody from our clients to the equipment vendors to make sure that the entire ecosystem is working to everyone's advantage. Because this really, our next big efforts on a lot of this stuff are stapled on utilizing this kind of this packaged format, this IMF format, in a way that now starts to open it up and harvest the true power of it, like we've always talked about. Because up until now, it's been a lot of interchange of composition level. The CPLs, everyone's really focused on CPLs, but I think we're now starting to gain some ground and figure out like how people are starting to look at those components that sit under the CPLs, and they want access to them, and they want them to be cloudified, and they want things to be instantly available at a push button, and make sure that we have those things for our distribution partners to do it. I think long gone are the tape days of like people wanting to wait for that tape to come off the shelf and go to a facility to have them encode something and do something with it, and then be able to put it onto a service. I think everyone expects to have your library pretty well live or in some kind of semi-offline state to where it's available within hours and not days anymore. So IMF is kind of our cornerstone on a lot of to handle a lot of those challenges as we move into the future of where we're going. Yeah, that's kind of where we. Anything to add, Greg?
No, I mean, I would just continue to kind of push forward with the, when you talk about the adoption of newer opportunities, Dave touched on it, which is, the ability to leverage the cloud infrastructures, the component-based nature of IMF and where we're taking it is finely tuned for that type of environment. And I think that going back to what Mike talked about around storage benefits, well, that's a big topic of conversation. Storage in the cloud is can be expensive depending on how you manage it and stuff like that. But that makes it even more crucial that you look at the way that you're managing your content and packaging that content and being really almost ruthless in the way that you're managing quality and the total package size of your title masters. So again, I think that it's just laning itself even further that future proof is always something we're going for. Nothing's ever future proof depending on how long you stretch it out, but the longevity of the strategy that we've deployed continues to bump itself into opportunities. And when I feel like you continuously bump into opportunities based off the decisions you made, that's when you start to feel really good about something that you applied 6 or 7 years ago.
Great. That's a great closing remark, Greg. Great. Thanks, Greg and David for participating. I think I have a quick question for everybody to start the question and answer session. Just for the end user, What's the most common reason an IMF package was rejected when it's delivered? So just as like a kind of a headline, what do we need to avoid when we're sending it into Disney or Sony?
I think that a lot of times, I mean, you're still looking at, just making sure that the metadata is proper. I think there's a lot in the in how things are flagged within the the detail of the metadata, because that all now is extremely important. It's no longer just a label on a tape, right? It's a trigger and a flag that actually tells you, or tells systems how to interpret the content that's there. And I would say that a majority of places that we find there's itty bitty hiccups that could lead to longer tail challenges is really more in the metadata of the packaging. But I know that, again, there's a lot of different ways to go about that. There's tools that are starting to kind of evolve. But I would say that that's one that I've seen quite often.
And Mike, do you have a comment about that?
Yeah, actually, I would add on top of that, there's a standard and then there's a specification. And Bruno touched on this going through some of the Colorfront software. We receive packages all the time that somebody says, oh, well, we made it to Netflix spec, so that's okay for you guys, right? And it's like, well, yes, it fits the standard, but it's not the specification, which is the limit on the standard that we set. So maybe if you really want to split hairs, sure. Yes, we could accept that, but it doesn't match what we require for our internal inventory, and same thing. Somebody might say, well, I made this for Sony, so it should be fine for you, but maybe not. We have a different mastering strategy than Sony does. That's just how it is. If you go into your Resolve or your Colorfront and you pick the wrong preset, yes, technically it may fit the standard, but it's not going to be what your recipient necessarily wants to get. And that I think is, to me, that's the one I run into a lot.
Oh, there's a good question that just popped up from Matthias. Do you want to take that one, Shawn?
I think I have to unmute before I should start talking.
Yeah, maybe Shawn and Mike can chime in on that one.
Yeah, it seemed like more of a Mike question, I think, just to validate our settings. I know that internally development is working with the studios to create these presets, and obviously to offer the correct attributes to set, or at least the range of attributes that are selectable in those presets.
All I can say is that, for me on my end, like, we work really, really hard to make sure that every time a new spec is posted on all the different portals for the studios, that our next version has these updates. But it's not a perfect world. It seems that the studio sends the spec sometimes to the post house, and we're the last one to know, but we're trying really hard to follow the spec. Boom.
Thanks, Bruno. Mike?
Yeah, we make that available as early as we can if we know there's a change. And we also know that depending on the system, sometimes you can go and edit a little XML and boom, your preset is done. Other times it's not quite so easy. So there might be a slight delay between when we do a spec update and then a software revision that gets issued to the end user. But as far as I know, to more directly answer the question, as far as I know, we're up to date on all the major systems.
And David and Greg, would you like to chime in about the evolving nature of the IMF spec?
Sure.
Or your specific spec, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, our specs don't really change a whole lot. We try to keep them as consistent. And one of the things that we do, and I'm not sure that this kind of gets back to the versionitis that Shawn was talking about, where, if somebody since we've been through three major revisions of IMF, the 2013 spec, the 2016 spec, and now the 2020 spec, we don't force people to re-roll the packages as they were created in that time. So if something was created against the 2013 spec, we we support it at that level. We don't force a re-render to the most current or to a new level unless it's absolutely required. If something like if IMF markers or something like that are required, we would say, okay, now you need to update because now you need to, obviously that was not in the prior revision. So we need something in a newer revision. But as far as versioning goes, and I think that the validation tools have been pretty hip to this as well, where if something is created a certain spec, it's not validating against the newest spec, because we do realize that things do change throughout the years. But we try to stay pretty consistent on that stuff. And to date, we haven't forced everybody to re-roll their entire libraries to the latest spec or something like that. For instance, coming up is going to be one of the next major decision that we're going to be doing in IMF is going to be, how are we going to handle IEB inside of our IMFs, right? Are we going to put it in there? Are we going to keep it as a sidecar? And as we do, that will obviously require our specs to change and evolve to the 2020 revisions and how we are going to accommodate that. So we're working on how that would work. But we wouldn't force people to create against the 2020 spec until we know that they're going to put it into that package and it needs to be at that. And then we'll have corresponding specifications that go along with that too. So that's a general thought process on how we handle it, because we have so much content in IMF and we don't like to break supply chains if we don't have to.
Yeah, and I'll just add real briefly. I mean, the other part is, we're running alongside capabilities, right? And they're evolving quickly, right? But I would say that if we had all the capabilities we had today in 2014, we probably would have maybe made those adjustments and asked for those items to be included. And so I think what's neat about, again, the community, and I'm looking to the left and the right of me, at least on my screens, Bruno and Shawn, is like, as these tools become, more mature and continue to allow for us to think about some, we'll call them next gen-ish ideas, or how we can apply tags and what they actually mean to people. And, automation advantages we can get through applying a lot of more robust checks at the front end. The capabilities are allowing for us to start thinking differently about it. And that's what's really hard about this, is that, I've used this before. It's like IMF is kind of ice cream, right? And so as long as everybody understands the base, then you can add in chocolate, you can add in pistachio, you can make it vanilla. It has its different flavors. And Bill would always tell me, well, it always has to be chocolate because that's the best. But that's the idea. And I think what's neat about this is we're talking for the first time about a basic construct that we're all agreeing to. And then there's little bits and tweaks that happen along the way that become their own flavor.
Well, you're making me hungry with all of that food conversation, and I've got I want to give back everybody their rest of their day. So I think that's a great point to close out the webinar on. So I just wanted to thank the Hollywood SMPTE team behind the scenes for putting this webinar together. I thank all the panelists for their time today and contributions, and thank all the attendees. I think I certainly learned a lot from this short panel, and I hope that you will take a look at the recording of it in the chance that you missed something that you wanted to review. Please do subscribe to the Hollywood SMPTE newsletter for future events. And now we have a closing note from Hollywood SMPTE Chair Linda Rosner. Linda?
Hey, sorry. Are we done?
Yeah, we're done. We're done, and we had a great discussion.
You did have a great discussion.
I learned a lot. I'm glad that we put this together for the community.
I apologize for I heard the silence and I thought, uh-oh, this is for me. Listen, guys, this was amazing. And again, to the attendees that came on, it's great. I want to give two special shout outs. One to Bill Bagalar of Sony, who really helped launch this and get David and Greg involved. And Bill, you're just a mega star. And also, on a personal note, it was wonderful to see John Stevens as an attendee as well, who has been up to a health scare like you wouldn't believe, and he's come through it. So just those personal notes. I love SMPTE. I love the SMPTE community. I hope you will all strongly consider joining and being a member, whether it be associate, whether it be pro. There is a 15% discount off until tomorrow. And we are hoping to have an in-person meeting at the Dunn Theater in about 2-3 weeks. I will send notices on that. And thank you all. Barry, Bruno, Shawn, Greg, David, Mike, Roberta, thank you for troubleshooting everything. Rafiq, our technical director, you are amazing. I thank you for your time and your patience, and everybody, thank you so much. And hopefully we'll meet in person next time.
Oh,
Have
just
a wonderful
just one
lunch.
more quick,
yes, Barry.
one
go
quick
ahead.
thing, Mike. If there's an IMF user group, if people really want to get into the nuts and bolts of that, where do people find out more information about that?
So IMF user group is organized through HPA, so it's also part of the SMPTE family. So if you go to the Hollywood Professional Association, you will find links to join the IMF user group if you are interested, or you can reach out to a few of us offline, and we'll be happy to hook you up.
Great, thanks for that, Mike. Okay, Linda, that's
Okay,
all I
great.
have.
One last thing, we're hoping for SMPTE Hollywood is probably going to have an IMF panel at NAB. So if you're all attending, again, we'll send out notices through SMPTE Hollywood as well as the general outreach. And I'm hoping many of these panelists will be able to attend. Anyway, thank you all. Appreciate your time. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.